The old sat in the corner of the veterans' hall, his 4 arms folded across his chest. His gray skin had turned almost white with age, and the scars on his face told stories that most beings would never want to hear. His name was, and he had served in wars across 3 different galaxies for over 200 years. A young cadet named Torin approached him with nervous steps. The boy had heard stories about the old commander. Everyone had, but the story Torin wanted to hear was the one rarely told, the story about the humans. "Commander," Torin said, his voice shaking slightly, "I was hoping you might share your experience from the Helix War, the war with the humans." Looked at the young cadet for a long moment. His dark eyes seemed to hold memories that weighed more than stars. Finally, he gestured to an empty seat. "Sit down," he said, "but understand this. What I tell you is not a story of victory or glory, it is a warning." Torin sat quickly, his heart beating fast with excitement. He did not understand the weight of those words. Not yet. Began to speak, his voice low and rough like stones grinding together. "I was sent to observe the humans during their first major war against another species. The Dominion had invaded their colony space, burning 3 worlds before the humans could respond. The Galactic Council sent observers to document the conflict. They sent me because I had seen more wars than anyone else still alive." He paused and looked out the window at the stars. The Council expected the war to last perhaps 2 cycles. The humans were young. They had only been in space for a few hundred years. Their ships were slower than ours. Their weapons were weaker. Their bodies were fragile. They lived such short lives that we considered them barely more than children playing at civilization. Torin nodded. He had learned this in his studies. Humans were considered one of the lesser species in galactic terms. "I arrived on their carrier ship, a vessel they called the Resolute Dawn. It was not impressive by our standards. The metal was thick and heavy. The design was simple, but when I stepped aboard I noticed something strange." "What was it?" Torin asked. The crew was laughing. Let those words hang in the air. Torin did not understand why this mattered. "They were about to go to war," continued. "They were about to face an enemy that had already killed millions of their people, and they were laughing, telling jokes, slapping each other on the back. I had observed many species prepare for battle. I had seen fear, anger, grim determination, but I had never seen a species laugh before walking into death." The old shook his head slowly. "It disturbed me more than I could explain." He told Torin about meeting the captain of the Resolute Dawn, a human male named Jack Harmon. Jack was not tall or physically impressive. He had gray in his hair and lines around his eyes from years of smiling. He welcomed aboard with a warm handshake, a human gesture of greeting that involved pressing their soft hands together. "Commander," Jack had said, "welcome aboard. I know the Council expects us to lose this war quickly. I hope we can at least give you something interesting to write about." There was no anger in his voice, no fear, just a quiet confidence that made no sense given the situation. Had toured the ship and observed the crew preparing for battle. He watched young humans cleaning weapons and checking equipment. He saw them writing messages to loved ones back home. One female crew member was showing pictures of her children to her friends. Another was reading a small book of poetry. "They knew they might die," said to Torin. "They all knew, and yet they acted as if this was simply another day, as if death was just one more thing to deal with, like a broken engine or a difficult navigation route." That first night aboard the ship, had dinner with the senior officers. He met Lieutenant Commander Kate, Jack's second in command. She was a sharp woman with red hair and eyes that missed nothing. He met the chief engineer, a large man named Pete who laughed loudly and drank something called coffee by the gallon. He met the flight commander, a young pilot named Danny Vance who could not have been more than 25 years old. They asked about his home world. They asked about his family. They treated him not as an outside observer sent to document their expected failure, but as a guest, as a friend. This confused greatly. After dinner, he walked with Captain Jack along the observation deck. The stars stretched out before them, cold and endless. Captain said, "I must ask you something." "Of course." "They have a fleet 4 times the size of yours. They have conquered 12 species. They have never lost a war. How can your crew laugh and joke when they face such an enemy?" Jack was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the stars with an expression could not read. "Commander, do you know how long humans have existed as a species?" "Approximately 300,000 years, by our records." "And do you know how long we have been fighting wars?" "Consider this. Your recorded history spans roughly 10,000 years. I assume warfare has existed for most of that time." Jack nodded slowly. 10,000 years of war, against each other. We have burned our own cities. We have killed millions of our own kind. We have invented weapons capable of destroying our entire planet, and we have come within minutes of using them. We have fought in trenches filled with poison gas. We have dropped fire from the sky until whole countries turned to ash. He turned to look at directly. His eyes were calm, steady, certain. They have conquered 12 species who had never truly known war until they came for them. They have never faced a species that has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing. They have no idea what is coming for them. Felt a chill run down his spine. It was not the cold of space. It was something deeper. Jack smiled then, a soft and quiet smile that held no joy in it. "We have been waiting our whole existence for an enemy worth fighting, Commander." The just volunteered. That night lay awake in his quarters, unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the laughter of the crew, the calm certainty of the captain, the way these fragile, short-lived creatures seemed to view war not as a tragedy to be avoided, but as something they had been preparing for since the dawn of their civilization. He recorded his first observation in his private log. "I came here expecting to document the death of a young species. I am beginning to fear I may witness something far worse. I do not yet understand what I am seeing in these humans, but I am afraid, and I do not know why." Outside his window, the stars continued to burn, indifferent to the small creatures who sailed between them. And somewhere ahead, the fleet waited, confident in their coming victory. They had no idea what they had awakened. 3 weeks into the war, stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn and watched the end of the world approach. The fleet had arrived at Antares colony with 120 warships. The human defense force had 31. The numbers were not close. They were not even in the same category. By every rule of warfare had ever learned, the humans should retreat. They should pull back, save their ships, and prepare to defend more important targets. This was basic military strategy. This was how wars were won. Captain Jack Harmon looked at the sensor display showing the approaching enemy fleet. His face was calm. His hands were steady. "All ships hold position," he said into the communication system. "We are not leaving." Stepped forward, unable to contain himself. "Captain, this is madness. You cannot win this battle. Your losses will be total. Standard doctrine requires immediate withdrawal to preserve your fighting strength." Jack turned to look at him. There was no anger in his eyes, only a strange, sad certainty. "Commander, how many people live on Antares colony?" 6 million approximately." 6 million people, families, children. They are counting on us to protect them while the evacuation ships escape." Jack pointed at the sensor display. "Those evacuation ships need 4 more hours to get everyone off the surface. If we leave, they will be in weapons range of the colony in 2 hours. They will kill everyone. But your entire fleet will be destroyed." "Probably. Your crews will die." "Yes." Stared at the human captain. He did not understand. Among his people, there were acceptable casualty ratios. There were calculations made about how many soldiers were worth how many civilians. No military commander would sacrifice an entire fleet for a colony that was already lost. Lieutenant Commander Kate spoke from her station. Her voice was hard as steel. "Commander, let me explain something to you. We do not leave people behind. Not ever. Not for any reason. Every person on those ships chose to be here knowing they might die. Every person on that colony is worth dying for. That is who we are." Before could respond, the communication system crackled with voices from across the fleet. Ship captains reporting in. All of them confirming their positions. All of them staying. The battle began. Had seen many battles in his long life. He had watched entire armadas clash among the stars, but he had never seen anything like what happened at Antares colony. The human ships were slower than the vessels. Their shields were weaker. Their weapons had less range. So the humans did something that made no sense. They charged directly into the enemy formation. It was suicide. It had to be suicide. But as watched, he realized the humans knew exactly what they were doing. Their pilots flew their small fighters straight at the largest ships, so close that the enemy's heavy weapons could not track them. They deployed their explosives at point-blank range and then pulled away at the last possible second. Some of them did not pull away in time. Some of them never intended to. A young pilot named Danny Vance led a squadron against a command ship. Had eaten dinner with Danny 3 weeks ago. The boy had shown him pictures of his mother back on Earth. He had talked about wanting to become a teacher after the war. Danny's fighter took a direct hit. His ship began venting atmosphere. His engine was failing. He had seconds to eject before the craft exploded. Instead, he turned his dying ship toward the command vessel. "Resolute Dawn, this is Vance." His voice came through the communication system, broken by static. "My ship is done. I am going to take their engine array with me. Tell my mom I love her." "Danny, eject," Kate shouted. "That is an order." "Sorry, Commander, too many people counting on us." Vance out. His fighter struck the command ship at full speed. The explosion tore through the enemy vessel's engines, crippling it completely. The massive warship began to drift, helpless. Stood frozen on the bridge. He had just watched a young man choose to die, not because he was forced to, not because he had no other option, but because his death might save others. The battle raged for 6 hours. The humans lost 18 ships. They lost over 4,000 crew members, but they held the line. When the last evacuation transport jumped away from Antares colony, carrying all 6 million civilians to safety, a strange sound filled the bridge of the Resolute Dawn. Cheering. The surviving crew members were cheering. They had won. Against impossible odds, against an enemy that should have destroyed them utterly, they had won. But notice something else. Captain Jack was not cheering. Kate was not cheering. They stood quietly, looking at the display showing the names of the dead, over 4,000 names. After the battle, there was a service for the fallen. Attended, standing in the back of the cargo bay that had been converted into a memorial space. Hundreds of humans gathered together. They read names. They shared stories. They wept openly, holding each other. Had never seen a military force grieve like this. Among his people, death in battle was accepted quietly. Emotions were considered weakness. But these humans wore their grief like armor. They let it break them, and then they used it to build themselves back stronger. He found Kate afterward, standing alone by a window, looking out at the stars. "Commander," he said carefully, "I must ask you something." She did not turn to look at him. "Go ahead." "You have just lost thousands of your people. Your fleet is badly damaged, and yet you celebrate. How can you celebrate after such loss?" Kate was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow and heavy. "We are not celebrating, Commander. We are honoring them. Every person who died today bought time for 6 million people to live. That was the trade they made. The only way to honor that trade is to keep living, to keep fighting, to make their deaths mean something. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was no weakness in them, only a fierce, burning determination. Tomorrow we will repair our ships, we will fill the empty seats with new crew members, and we will go back out there and fight again, because that is what they would want, because that is what we do. Did not know what to say. He had observed many species at war. He had seen courage and cowardice in equal measure, but he had never seen a species that used their grief as fuel, that turned their pain into purpose. That night he added to his private log, "I have made a serious error in my initial assessment. I believed humans were soft because they show emotion. I believed they were weak because they value individual lives so highly. I was wrong. Their emotion is not weakness. It is the source of their strength. They fight not for territory or resources or power. They fight for each other, and they will die for each other without hesitation. This makes them more dangerous than any species I have ever observed. They have no idea what they are truly facing." Outside, the stars continued to burn, and somewhere in the darkness, the surviving human fleet began to prepare for the next battle. They had won the first victory, but the war was just beginning. The months passed slowly aboard the resolute Dawn, traveled with the human fleet from battle to battle, from victory to defeat and back again. And with each passing day, his confusion grew deeper. He had studied warfare for over 200 years. He understood tactics and strategy. He understood how species behaved when their survival was threatened. But humans refused to follow any pattern he recognized. They were full of contradictions. One morning, observed a young medic named Amy Cole treating wounded soldiers in the medical bay. She moved with gentle hands and soft words, caring for each patient as if they were family. Nothing unusual about that. Then the guards brought in a wounded prisoner, a soldier captured during a boarding action. The creature was badly hurt, bleeding from multiple wounds. By all logic, Amy should have ignored it. They were the enemy. They had killed her friends. They had burned human colonies and murdered millions. Instead, Amy walked over to the wounded and began treating its injuries. Approached her, unable to contain his curiosity. "Why are you helping this creature? It is the enemy." Amy did not look up from her work. Her hands continued their careful movements, cleaning wounds and applying bandages. "He is hurt," she said simply. "That is all that matters right now. But its species has killed so many of your people." "I know," she paused and looked at with tired eyes. "But I did not become a medic to choose who deserves to live. I became a medic to save lives, all lives, even his." The prisoner looked up at her with confusion in its eyes. It had expected torture. It had expected death. It had not expected kindness. Walked away, more confused than before. He observed another contradiction during a memorial service for fallen crew members. The humans gathered together, over 300 of them packed into a cargo bay. They read names of the dead. They shared memories. They wept openly, holding each other and letting their grief pour out without shame. Among his people, such displays would be considered weakness. Emotion was meant to be controlled, hidden, managed. But these humans wore their grief like badges of honor. And then something remarkable happened. The service ended. The tears dried. And within minutes, those same grief-stricken humans picked up their weapons and reported to their duty stations. The same eyes that had been red with crying became hard and focused. The same hands that had trembled with sorrow became steady and ready for war. It made no sense. How could they feel so deeply and still function so effectively? Asked Captain Jack about this during one of their evening conversations. Jack smiled sadly and poured himself a drink. "Commander, let me tell you something about humans. We do not choose between feeling and fighting. We do both. We feel everything deeply because that is what gives us reasons to fight, and we fight fiercely because we have things worth protecting. But does the grief not weaken you?" No, it strengthens us. Every person we lose adds to our determination. Every friend who dies becomes a reason to keep going. Jack set down his glass. The think emotion is weakness. They think that if they hurt us enough, we will break. They are wrong. Every time they hurt us, they give us more reasons to fight harder. Thought about this for a long time. He began to research human history in the ship's database. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans had been fighting each other since before they had written language. They had killed each other with stones and sticks, then with metal and fire, then with explosives and chemicals and radiation. They had fought wars that lasted decades. They had committed horrors against their own kind that made atrocities seem simple by comparison. There was a conflict called the First World War. Humans had dug trenches across an entire continent and killed each other by the millions. They had used poison gas that melted lungs. They had charged into machine gun fire knowing they would die. There was something called the Second World War. Humans had dropped bombs that turned entire cities to fire. They had built factories designed solely for killing their own people. They had invented weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. And still they survived. Still they continued. Still they rebuilt and recovered and moved forward. Read about the atomic bombs dropped on human cities. 2 explosions that killed hundreds of thousands instantly. And within years, those same cities were rebuilt. The same species that had created such terrible weapons had also created art and music and medicine. He shared his research with Kate one evening. "I do not understand your species," he admitted. "You are capable of such terrible things, such cruelty and destruction, and yet you are also capable of such kindness, such love and sacrifice." Kate nodded slowly. "That is the human paradox, Commander. We contain everything, all the darkness and all the light. We can be monsters or angels sometimes in the same day, sometimes in the same moment. How do you live with that?" "We struggle. Every day every person struggles to be better than their worst impulses. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we fail badly, but we keep trying." She looked at him directly. "That is what the do not understand. They think they can defeat us by being more brutal than we are. But we wrote the book on brutality. We have survived ourselves. They are nothing compared to what we have already overcome." That night made a long entry in his private log. "I have spent months observing humans in war. I have watched them grieve and fight and love and die, and I am beginning to understand what makes them so dangerous. It is not their weapons or their tactics. It is their nature. They contain multitudes. They can feel deep compassion for an enemy prisoner and cold determination to destroy an enemy fleet. They can weep for their dead and then immediately return to battle. They embrace their contradictions instead of being weakened by them. Other species see emotion as weakness to be suppressed. Humans see it as strength to be channeled. They fight for territory or resources. We fight for survival or dominance. But humans fight for each other. They fight for love. They fight for abstract ideas like honor and justice and hope. And they will pay any price, any cost, any sacrifice for those things. I have observed many species wage war. The fight for territory. The fight for dominance. But humans fight for each other. And that makes them dangerous beyond measure. I fear that by the time this war ends, they will understand this truth. But by then, it will be far too late." Outside the ship, the stars continued their ancient dance. And somewhere in the darkness, the human fleet prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of the war. Had seen enough to know that whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. The Battle of New Eden was supposed to be the end of humanity. They had gathered their largest fleet in the history of their empire. 250 warships, each one carrying thousands of soldiers, advanced toward the human colony world of New Eden. The commanders were confident. They had studied human tactics. They had learned from their earlier defeats. This time, they would crush the humans completely. The human defense fleet had 73 ships. Most of them were damaged from earlier battles. Many were running low on ammunition and supplies. The crews were exhausted from months of constant fighting. Stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn and watched the massive fleet appear on the sensors. His heart sank. This was not a battle. This was an execution. Admiral Ben Sawyer commanded the combined human forces from his flagship, the Constellation. He was an old man with white hair and tired eyes, but his voice was strong when he addressed the fleet. "This is Admiral Sawyer to all ships. I am not going to lie to you. The odds are not in our favor today. We are outnumbered. By any reasonable calculation, we should lose this battle." He paused. The entire fleet was silent, waiting. But I did not join the Navy to fight reasonable battles. None of us did. We joined because we believe in something worth fighting for, worth dying for. His voice grew softer, but somehow more powerful. Many of you have families waiting for you back home, children who want their parents to come back, parents who pray every night for their sons and daughters. I want you to think about them right now. Think about the people you love. Think about the future you want to see. Looked around the bridge. Every human was listening with absolute attention. Some had tears in their eyes. That is what we are fighting for today. Not for territory, not for glory for them, for the people who cannot fight for themselves, for the future of our species. The Admiral's voice hardened. They think they understand us. They think they can break us with fear and numbers. They are wrong. Today we show them what humans are made of. Today we fight not just to survive, but to live. There is a difference. Survival is running away. Living is standing your ground and protecting what matters. Today we live. The communication channel erupted with responses from across the fleet. Crews cheering. Captains confirming their readiness. 73 ships prepared to face 250. The battle began like a storm breaking. They advanced in their standard formation, confident in their superior numbers, but the humans did not wait to receive them. They attacked. Watched in amazement as smaller human ships threw themselves in front of larger ones, taking hits meant for more valuable targets. Damaged vessels did not retreat. Instead, they pushed forward, using their dying moments to inflict maximum damage on the enemy. The fighting was brutal. Ships exploded on both sides. Thousands died in seconds. The darkness of space lit up with weapons fire and explosions. On the surface of New Eden, the ground battle was just as fierce. A squad of Marines led by Staff Sergeant Chris held a civilian evacuation point against wave after wave of soldiers. They had been ordered to hold for 6 hours until the evacuation was complete. They held for 18. Listened to the ground communications with growing disbelief. Squad started with 40 soldiers. After 6 hours, they had 20. After 12 hours, they had 8. They kept coming. Hundreds of enemy soldiers threw themselves at the small group of humans defending that evacuation point. "Sergeant, fall back," the command center ordered. "You have done enough." "Negative, command's voice came back, rough with exhaustion and pain. "Still civilians moving through, we hold." They held. When relief forces finally reached the evacuation point after 18 hours, only 3 humans were still alive. Sergeant and 2 of his soldiers stood among hundreds of dead. Their ammunition was gone. Their weapons were damaged. They had been fighting with knives and bare hands at the end. Looked at the relief commander with hollow eyes. "The civilians?" he asked. "All evacuated, every single one." Nodded once, then he collapsed. Back in space, the Resolute Dawn took a devastating hit. The bridge shook violently. Alarms screamed. Fire erupted from damaged consoles. "Hull breach in sections 7 through 12, Kate shouted. "We are losing atmosphere." Captain Jack Harmon gripped the command console, blood running down his face from a cut on his forehead. "All hands abandon ship. Get to the escape pods." "Captain, what about you?" Kate demanded. "Someone needs to keep the weapons firing. Buy time for the pods to launch." Kate crossed the bridge in 3 steps and grabbed Jack by the arm. "You have a daughter waiting for you on Earth. Emma needs her father more than this fleet needs one more dead hero." Jack hesitated. In that moment saw something he had never seen before in the captain's eyes. Fear. Not fear of death, fear of leaving someone behind. "Jack," Kate said, her voice breaking, "please. She already lost her mother. Do not make her lose you too." The captain looked at the battle raging outside the window. Ships dying, people dying, his fleet holding against impossible odds. He let Kate pull him toward the escape pods. The Resolute Dawn exploded 3 minutes later, but by then the tide of the battle had turned. The fleet was breaking. Their command structure had been destroyed. Their confidence had shattered against the wall of human determination. One by one, the ships began to retreat. Watched from his escape pod as the enemy fleet fled. 250 ships had arrived expecting easy victory. Fewer than 80 escaped. The humans had won. He found himself trembling. His 4 hands shook uncontrollably. It was not relief he felt. It was not joy. It was fear. He had just watched a species absorb terrible losses and keep fighting. He had watched individuals choose death without hesitation to save others. He had watched grief transform into fury and fury transform into victory. They had lost more than a battle today. They had lost the war, because now the galaxy knew what it had learned over these long months. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not calculate acceptable losses or weigh costs against benefits. They fought with everything they had for the people they loved, and they would pay any price, no matter how terrible, to protect those people. As the escape pod drifted through the debris field of the battle, made a silent promise to himself. He would return home. He would tell his leaders what he had seen, and he would make them understand one simple truth. Never fight the humans. Never threaten what they love. Because if you do, they will come for you with all the fury of a species that has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. And they will not stop until you are destroyed. 20 years had passed since the Helix War ended. Sat in the Veterans Hall on Prime, his story finally told. The young cadet Torin stared at him with wide eyes, his face pale. The excitement he had felt at the beginning of the tale was gone, replaced by something deeper, something that looked like understanding. "What happened after the battle?" Torin asked quietly. "They surrendered within 3 cycles. Their fleet was broken. Their morale was destroyed. They had expected to crush a weak young species and instead discovered something far more terrible." Paused, remembering. The humans were merciful in victory. They did not destroy though they had every right to. They demanded reparations and guarantees of peace, but they did not seek revenge. That seems unlike what you described. That is the final contradiction of humanity. They can wage war with terrible ferocity, but they can also end war with unexpected grace. They fight to protect, not to conquer. Once the threat was over, they stopped, shook his head slowly. "I think that frightened me most of all. A species that can turn their fury on and off like a light. Controlled violence, purposeful destruction. They never lost themselves in the killing. They always remained human." Torin was quiet for a long moment. "What happened to the people you met? The captain and the others?" A small smile crossed his ancient face. "Captain Jack survived. He returned home to his daughter Emma. I am told he spent many years teaching young officers at their naval academy. He died peacefully 10 years ago, surrounded by family and friends. Lieutenant Commander Kate took command of a new ship after the war. She became an admiral eventually. Sergeant recovered from his wounds and retired to a small farm somewhere on Earth. The medic Amy continued saving lives. They all continued living, as humans do." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal object. It was a star with a ribbon attached, old and worn from years of handling. "What is that?" Torin asked. "The humans call it a bronze star. It is a military medal awarded for acts of courage." Held it carefully, as if it were made of something precious. Captain Jack gave this to me after the war ended. He said I had stayed with them when I did not have to. He said I had witnessed who they truly were, and that made me one of them. He looked at the medal with an expression Torin could not read. I have received many honors in my long life, medals from a dozen different species for my service in their wars, but this small piece of metal frightens me more than all the others combined. Why? Because of what it represents. The humans included me. They accepted me, a stranger from another world who came to watch them die. They welcomed me into their family simply because I stayed. His voice grew heavy. That is their greatest strength and their greatest weapon. They do not just fight for each other. They expand their definition of who counts as one of their own, today an enemy, tomorrow a friend. They are capable of hate, yes, but they are far more capable of love. And love is stronger than hate. It always has been. Put the medal away and look directly at the young cadet. After the war, the Galactic Council asked me to provide a strategic assessment of humanity. They wanted to know how to deal with this new power in the galaxy, how to contain them, how to defeat them if necessary. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. Never engage humanity in open warfare. Never threaten their colonies or their families. Never give them a reason to view you as an enemy. Because they are too strong. No, because they will never stop. Leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. Other species fight for territory. When they lose enough territory, they surrender. Other species fight for resources. When the cost becomes too high, they negotiate. Other species fight for pride. When their pride is satisfied, they make peace. But humans fight for each other. They fight for love, for family, for abstract ideas like freedom and justice. And you cannot take those things away from them. You cannot destroy an idea. You cannot kill love. His voice dropped lower. If you fight them, they will lose soldiers. They will grieve. They will weep and scream and curse the universe for its cruelty. And then they will stand up, wipe their tears away, and come at you again, and again, and again, until you are broken or they are dead. Every last one of them. There is no acceptable loss for humans. There is no point where they decide the cost is too high. As long as one human remains alive to remember why they were fighting, the war continues. Torin swallowed hard. So the Council listened to your warning. They did. 20 years of peace between humans and the other species of the galaxy. 20 years of trade and diplomacy and cooperation. The humans have made many friends in that time. They have joined alliances and built partnerships. Paused. They have also continued building their fleet, improving their weapons, training their soldiers. They hope for peace, but they prepare for war, always. The old stood slowly, his joints aching with age. He walked to the window of the Veterans Hall and looked out at the stars. You asked me what I fear most about humans, he said, his back to Torin. It is not their weapons. It is not their tactics. It is not even their willingness to die. It is something simpler, something I saw in Captain Jack's eyes the night before the Battle of New Eden. What? Other species see death as an ending, a final thing, a tragedy to be avoided at all costs, but humans see death differently. They see it as a price, a currency to be spent for things that matter, and they will pay it again and again and again for those they love. He turned back to face Torin. That is why, if you ever face them in battle, you will not win, not because they are stronger or smarter or better equipped, but because you cannot kill what they are willing to die for. You cannot destroy love. You cannot conquer hope. You can burn their worlds and slaughter their armies and break their bodies, and they will rise from the ashes and rebuild, every single time. Outside the window, a human diplomatic vessel was approaching the station. Its hull still bore scars from the Helix War, old wounds that had never been fully repaired, a reminder of what they had survived, a warning of what they could survive again. Watch the ship dock, his 4 hands clasped behind his back. 20 years of peace. 20 years since he had witnessed humanity at war. 20 years since he had seen what they were truly capable of. And still, after all that time, his hands trembled. because he knew the truth that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Humans were not dangerous because of what they could destroy. They were dangerous because of what they could endure, what they could love, what they would sacrifice. The old turned away from the window and walked past the young cadet toward the door. "Remember what I have told you," he said quietly, "and pray that you never have to learn it for yourself." He left the veterans' hall and disappeared into the crowded corridors of Prime. Behind him, the stars continued to burn. The human ship sat peacefully at the dock, and somewhere in the galaxy, humanity went about its daily life, loving and laughing and living. Ready to fight again if they had to. Ready to die again if they must. Ready to pay any price for those they loved. That was the truth had learned in the fires of war. And it chilled him to the bone.